Okay, welcome everybody to this class. We are going to start reading the Megillah. Let me share the screen with you all. So the Talmud says, when you read the story of the Megillah and you think, if you read the Megillah backwards, you do not fulfill your obligation. This is what the Talmud says. What does the Talmud mean? Very simple. If you read the story of the Megillah and you think that the story of the Megillah happened years ago and is not happening today in our lives, lo yatsa, you do not fulfill your obligation. Why is that? Because the Megillah is something that's relevant and happening today in 2021. There are lessons that I need to learn from the Megillah. So take a look at the text in front of you. We start off. There was in the days of Achashverosh, we all know the story. He ruled over 127 countries. Great. He ruled over most of the world. By the way, the threat that was facing the Jewish people during the times of Achashverosh was a threat like none other. Even Hitler, Yamach Shemo, was able to rule over the Jews living in his kingdom, so to speak. But American Jews, Israeli Jews, London, he didn't rule over parts of the world that Jews existed. Achashverosh and Haman threatened to annihilate every single man, woman, and child, something that never has happened before in history. That's why the threat of annihilation was so severe in the times of Achashverosh. So I'm going to share the story behind the story. Just another little thing over here. Megillat Esther. The word Esther is milashon haster astir, which means hide. When you look at the Megillah, it's the only book in the entire Torah that does not mention God's name. But in other words, it seems like natural events. But if you look behind the story, if you look behind the scenes, you will notice God's presence at every single way, every single stage. How Achashverosh, Bidyuk, then he slept, he fell asleep, and how Haman walked into Mordechai. Every single chain of an event seems like a natural event, but it was all orchestrated by God. By the way, that's why we eat Haman Tashan, Oznei Haman on Purim, because Oznei Haman, Haman Tashan on the outside, they are like the dough, but if you look inside, that's when you'll find the delicious part of the Haman Tashan. So if you look inside, you will be able to see God every single step of your lives. 2021, do you see God? I don't see him. But if you think and you analyze and you look at the steps of your life, you will notice that God was there every single step of the way. So Mordechai finds out about the plot to kill to kill Achashverosh. So what does he do? To kill the Jews, I'm sorry. He finds out about Haman's plot to kill the Jews. What does he do? He tells Esther, please go to your husband, to Achashverosh, and tell him about the plot and try to save the Jews. So Esther's reaction, right over here, I'm pulling it up right in front of you on the screen. It's in chapter 4. Right, they go through an intermediary called Hatach. Verse 11 in front of you. All the king's servants know that Achashverosh made this rule that you cannot enter into his chamber unless he calls you. I wasn't called, so my life will be threatened if I go into Achashverosh without being summoned. So in verse 12 and 13 and 14, Mordechai says one of the most powerful words in the whole Megillah. He says to Esther, if you are silent at this time, if you don't go and do what's necessary, the Jews will be saved through a different channel, through a different avenue. Mordechai tells Esther, we don't need you. We're giving you the privilege of going to save the Jews. But let it be known that we don't need you because God will find another channel, another avenue to save the Jews. He doesn't need you. Revach v'atzala ya'amod layudim mimakom acher. And then he tells her, who knows if the reason why you became the queen was for this one moment. You see, in our lives, when it comes time to doing a mitzvah, sometimes it's hard for us. Oh, it's so difficult to do a mitzvah. So we tell this Jew, we don't need you to do this mitzvah. God will find another avenue to get this benefit, to get this mitzvah. But who knows? Maybe the whole reason you were created was for this one moment. See, the Baal Shem Tov writes that a soul comes down into this world for 70, 80, 90, 100 years, and it could be it's living here for one time, one mitzvah for a fellow Jew. It could be we were created for one moment. When that moment comes, what are you going to do? Are you going to rise to the occasion or not? And Mordechai, through these words, was able to convince Esther. Let's take a look at the depth of Esther. What does she do? So Esther is faced with a crisis. What does a Jew do when he's faced with a crisis? First thing we do, we daven to God. We pray. We fast. Esther, the first thing she does, she gathers all the Jews. She says to them, please, let's all pray. That's the first thing a Jew does. But afterwards, she makes the most brilliant, cunning plan, the most incredible plan she makes, and she's able to foil the plot of the two most powerful people on earth, Ahasuerus and Haman. She's able in the most stunning way to bring these two Jew haters down. What happens? Esther goes. Look at chapter 5 right in front of you. Esther goes to the king. Verse 2. She finds favor in his eyes, and he extends the golden scepter, and he says to Esther, my dear, beautiful, darling wife, what do you want? I'll give you half the kingdom. So verse 4, look at verse 4 carefully. Esther says, if it's good for the king, may the king and Haman come to the feast that I have prepared for him. Now that's a very normal thing, right? Let's say you're a broker and you want a certain developer to hire you as his personal broker for this building. Or let's say you're a fundraiser and you want to raise $100,000 for a course. It's very normal to say to your potential client, I'd rather not discuss this on the phone. Let's meet for lunch next week. Very normal. At the lunch, you'll go to a beautiful kosher restaurant and you'll wine and dine the prospective person. And when he or she is in a good mood, you'll make your ask. You will say, hey, can I please get the exclusive of this building? Can I please get the $100,000? Very normal, very nice. So that's what Esther does. She says to the king, come to the feast that I prepared for you, and tomorrow I'll fulfill your request. Very nice, very good. But let's look at what happens at the meal. Verse number 5, and read it over here. Go bring Haman quickly. And then verse number 6, they at the meal. Okay, so now I'm at the lunch, I'm at the dinner with the prospective client, and I want to get everything I can. Now what happens? The king says to Esther, tell me what you want. I'd love to know what you want. Verse number 7, you know what she says? In verse number 8, in a stunning, doesn't make sense, her request, she says, if I have found favor in the king's eyes, look at verse number 8, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I'm going to do for them, and tomorrow I'll tell you what my request is. Now imagine you are that fundraiser asking for, I don't know, $1,000, right? So you're whining and dining your prospective person, or you're a broker and you're trying to get that exclusive. And this person has made time for you. He's come to your lunch and he's having dinner and steak or whatever and wine and everything's wonderful. And he asks you, okay, mister, what do you want? And you'll tell him, you know what I want? I want that tomorrow night, let's go out for dinner again. And tomorrow night, I'll tell you. He will most likely tell you, you're a meshugana, thank you so much. Stop wasting my time. Either you tell me now what you want, or I'm not. That's most likely what's going to happen. Why does Esther ask for a second feast, for a second meal? Why does Ahasuerus agree to it? And it is here that we find and discover Esther's brilliance, Esther's incredible brain, a Yiddish kop, how Esther was able to bring down the most powerful people in the world in the most stunning and dramatic way. And the Megillah hints to this with one word. Look at verse 4 carefully and look at verse 8 carefully. In verse 4, by the first invitation, there's one word different to invitation number 2 in verse number 8. Ela mishteh asher asiti lo, to the feast that I've done for him. Versus verse 8, Ela mishteh asher e'eseh lahem. First meal. Esther says, this is a meal for you, Ahasuerus, in the singular. Second invitation, Asher e'eseh lahem. This invitation now is for you, Ahasuerus and Haman. Let's analyze now what happened. So Esther has a problem. How on earth does she convince Ahasuerus, who hates the Jews just like Haman, how does she convince him not to kill the Jews? I mean, She can't just say, "Oh, well, please don't kill the Jews." It's not going to work. It's just not going to work. So she analyzes Achashverosh. She analyzes Haman. What are each one's strengths? What are each one's weaknesses? And let's play one against the other. Here's what she does. When she analyzes Achashverosh, what do we know about Achashverosh? We know that in the beginning of the Megillah, we know that Achashverosh made a meal, a feast for 180 days. What kind of meshugana crazy guy makes a meal for 180 days? Who does that? I mean, you can party for a night, 2 nights, a week. You know, after COVID-19 is over, we all going to go party and go crazy, right? But I can't imagine anybody partying for 180 days. Achashverosh was a specific kind of personality. The Megillah tells us Achashverosh was really Mr. Nothing. He was in charge of his father-in-law's horses. The real king was a man by the name of Belshazzar, who had a daughter by the name of Vashti. She was the queen. Vashti happened to fall in love with the person who was taking care of the stables, of the horses, with Achashverosh. He was a nothing. So when she fell in love with him, and her father passed away, by default he became the king. Achashverosh was paranoid, was neurotic. He was worried that somebody's going to usurp his power. So he made a meal for 180 days to show everybody, to flaunt his wealth and show everybody, say, I'm the king, I'm the most powerful person, look at me, I'm amazing. He needed that thing to encourage him, his ego. And that is why at the meal, when he summons Vashti, Vashti says to him, you summoning me? I'm the queen, you're a nothing. He has her killed. What kind of crazy husband has his wife killed for not appearing in front of him? He's crazy. What kind of person does that? Somebody who's crazy. Achashverosh was neurotic, was paranoid. He couldn't stand that Vashti reminded him that he was a nobody, that he was a nothing. He was neurotic. Who was the person who suggested that Vashti be killed? Vayomer Memuchan. Memuchan, the advisor Memuchan, who said, oh, the queen didn't want to appear in front of you. Look at verse 16. It's like a disaster for the whole princes and all the people of the whole land. Who was that person? Haman. Haman exploited Achashverosh's weakness, his paranoia. He knew this person was paranoid, so he kept on whispering into the king's ear, oh, kill this person, kill that person. There's a coup here, there's a coup there. Who makes a decree that nobody's allowed to come in front of me unless I summon them? That was what Achashverosh did. Nobody's allowed to come in front of me unless I summon them. What kind of crackpot does that? His own wife can't come to him? Because Haman kept on feeding him conspiracy theories. And this guy's attacking you, and this guy's attacking you. We got to be worried and worried and worried. So Esther, when she tried to figure out how to do the impossible, how to get the Jews out of the predicament, she thinks, Achashverosh, okay, I know his weakness. Now, what is Haman's weakness? Okay. So she thinks and she thinks and she thinks. Who was Haman? Talmud tells us that Haman min haTorah minayin. Where do we know Haman from the Torah? Where do we know Haman? So the Torah tells us. The Torah says, Hamin ha'etz asher tziviticha lechol mimenu achalta. Did you eat from the tree that I forbade you to eat from? The word Hamin is the same letters as Haman. The story of Adam and Eve, when Adam ate from the tree of knowledge, that is Haman. What is a similarity? You see, Adam, the first man, had everything in the whole world. He had all the real estate in the world. He had all the women. It happened to be there's only one woman alive, but he had everything in the entire world was all his. He was allowed to eat from anything and everything besides for one thing. There was only one thing that he couldn't have. That was the tree of knowledge. Do you know how long it took him to sin with the tree of knowledge? No less than 3 hours. Within 3 hours, he had sinned. What kind of personality does this? You have everything. There's one thing you don't have, and it drives you crazy, says the Torah. That's Haman. Haman was rich, was powerful, famous. In fact, he made a rule that every single person in the universe, when Haman rides past, walks past, you have to bow down on the floor. What kind of egomaniac part does this. Somebody who's so power hungry, who's so full of himself, narcissistic ego on steroids. That was Haman. Haman comes home one day and his wife asks him, how was your day? And in the most powerful words, he says to her, my day was amazing. But he says, you see everything I have in the entire world. Look at verse 13 in front of you. Everything I have. He had 10 beautiful, healthy children that were hung later. Wealth and power and a beautiful, loving wife. Everything a man's heart can possibly desire, Haman had. But he says to his wife, everything I have is worth nothing. You know why? Because there's one thing I don't have. There's one Jew out of the millions of Jews alive that refuses to bow down to me, and therefore everything I have is worthless. Who does that? Only somebody who's so power hungry, who's so ego-centric, crazy, maniac. So Esther thinks, okay, I know Haman, I know Achashverosh, I know their weakness. She now played one against the other in the most incredible fashion, incredible way. So let's go back to that one word that the Megillah tells us everything that I just said happened. Verse 4, verse 8. The first meal, Esther invites Achashverosh. The second meal, she says, this meal is for Achashverosh and Haman. At the first meal, Esther is laughing with Haman. She's whining and dining and joking with Haman, maybe even touching him and flirting with him a little bit. And Achashverosh asks her, what's wrong? And she says, there's something terrible. There's a calamity. There's something so bad. What is it? What does that do to somebody who's so power hungry? What does that do? It drives him berserk. It drives him crazy. Esther, what's going on? And normally, the only person he could trust was Haman. Now he couldn't trust Haman. He couldn't trust him. Why not? Because he doesn't know what's going on over here. She now invites for the second meal both of us. That nuance is not lost on somebody who's a power-hungry, paranoid person. Type A personality is paranoid. 1 second. She invites me, and now it's both of us? What's going on? What is Achashverosh's reaction after this meal? This is where the Megillah tells us the miracle began. Look at verse 1 in front of you. Achashverosh goes out of the meal, and the Megillah tells us, the king couldn't sleep. You know why he couldn't sleep? Because the whole night he's neurotic and paranoid. What is going on? What is Esther and Haman planning? What is there a coup? Is there something I don't know about? Who's trying to attack me? Who's trying to usurp my authority? What is going on? He has a sleepless night. That is exactly what Esther wanted. She's feeding his paranoia. She's feeding him and feeding it and feeding it. She took his weakness and used it against him. Now let's look. What does Haman react after the first meal? The Megillah tells us so clearly. Verse number 9. Esther fed Haman's ego. She told him, Haman, you're the greatest, you're the best. And she's touching him and lavishing him with attention. He was thrilled, he was so happy. In verse 12, the Megillah tells us, it's so funny, but the Megillah, look at the verse. Vayomer Haman, Esther, his wife asked him, how was your day? He says to her, you know how my day was? It was incredible. The queen made a feast. And do you know that the only person she invited to the feast was me? He says the only person she brought was me. That's amazing. That's incredible. She fed his ego mania on steroids. He's now feeling so good. Oh, this is amazing. He's feeling incredible. And that is why when the king has a sleepless night and Haman happens to come by, and Achashverosh asks him, what should I do for a person who I love so much that has found favor in my eyes? Haman Can't even think of anybody else that this could be for. Look at verse number 6. And Haman said to himself, whom would the king wish to honor more than me? He's full of himself. That's who he thinks. Now that Esther has fed Ahasuerus's paranoia and fed Haman's ego, now we read what happens at the second meal. Take a look now. The king has had a sleepless night. He's paranoid. And right away, verse number 2 says, tell me, what is your request? What's bothering you? He's like so agitated. Please, Esther, tell me what's wrong. Look at Esther's words. Slowly, methodically, she's continuing to feed him, stoke his paranoid. My life, my nation is in jeopardy. My people, please, king. She's stoking him. She's feeding him. And then she says, remember, Achashverosh didn't know she was Jewish at this stage. We have been sold, me and my people, la'ashmid, laharog, la'abed. People want to destroy us and kill us. We have been sold as slaves. Slowly. So finally, Achashverosh says in verse number 5, who is the person? Please, I can't sleep. Tell me. Who is the one responsible for this? And finally, Esther says, Vatomer Esther, Ish tsar be'oyev Haman hara hazeh. She finally says, Haman. Haman was shocked. What? Me? What? She had put Haman in a place where he didn't realize that she would utterly destroy him, decimate him. And look at Achashverosh's reaction in verse number 7. Achashverosh is so crazy. He goes outside and he's so angry. He needs like a breather, like a cigarette, like a breather. And Haman realizes he's in big trouble. So he falls on the couch where Esther is and he pleads for his life. And at that moment, when Achashverosh walks in and thinks that Haman is sleeping with his wife, Esther's plan finally came into fulfillment. She finally had Haman exactly where she wanted him. This was her plan from the beginning. She wanted to create a wedge between Achashverosh and Haman. And she wanted Achashverosh to think that Haman is plotting with her a coup or something. And when she had him here, Achashverosh was so furious, he had him hung and he destroyed Haman and his plan was out. This was the most brilliant, cunning, manipulative move by Esther to draw a wedge between these two powerful adversaries. How did she do it? By stoking this guy's paranoia, by feeding this guy's ego, by disarming Haman, by disarming Ahasuerus in a plot, in the most brilliant, cunning plan. What is the message for us? First of all, nothing is impossible. Nothing. Everything we do in our lives can be done, can be accomplished. But the first thing Esther does, remember, is pray to God. There doesn't exist a human being in this planet Earth that doesn't have big problems. We all have problems. First thing you do to resolve your crisis is pray to God. Once you've prayed to God, now you do something to fix your problem. Go to a doctor, buy some stocks, get a job, do whatever you need to do to be able to get out of your predicament, out of your crisis. So the greatest lesson from Esther is Megillah. Esther, Megillah means revealing. Esther is the Helem. Revealing God, finding God in the darkness of your life. Sometimes we think, oh, where's God? I don't see him. God is present, prevalent at every single stage of the way. Any questions in tonight's class?